are you capable of killing somebody?
I would say no.
What happens when an athlete is a killer and says he killed people in a book like a confession? Well, generally, he will be called into the courtroom and get sent to jail. But not in the case of O.J. Simpson. How does a murder trial captivate the world, divide a nation, and still leave people scratching their heads decades later? I mean, we still don't know what exactly happened, right? What happened on the night Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were brutally killed? And why did O.J. Simpson, accused of the crime, later write a book titled, "If I Did It," that sounded more like a confession than a what-if scenario? Did his race play a role? In this video, we're diving deep into the trial of the century, a case that exposed flaws in the legal system, raised questions about race, fame, and justice, and left us all wondering, did O.J. get away with murder? We'll explore the evidence, the courtroom drama, the mistakes that shaped the outcome, and the shocking twists that followed years later. From the infamous glove demonstration to a bizarre hypothetical confession, this story only gets stranger the more you dig into it. So buckle up, because this is a case that's as controversial as it is unforgettable. Let's unravel the mystery of O.J. Simpson's trial and why it continues to haunt headlines to this day. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest scandals and mysteries of our time. Let's get started. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were killed sometime between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on June 12, 1994. However, shortly after 11 p.m., O.J. Simpson entered a waiting limousine, which took him to Los Angeles International Airport, where he boarded a flight to Chicago. On Sunday night, O.J. Simpson boarded a red-eye flight in first class. Within 20 minutes, his ex-wife and her friend were found dead outside her residence. Their bodies were discovered shortly after midnight, and by noon on June 13th, Simpson had returned to Los Angeles, where he was questioned by police. Despite this, he wasn't arrested immediately. It took 4 days until June 17th for authorities to take him into custody. This delay occurred even though police had found bloodstains on Simpson's white Ford Bronco and a glove on his property that matched one found near the crime scene. To outsiders, it may seem baffling that Simpson wasn't arrested sooner. However, celebrity status often creates unexpected dynamics. As UCLA law professor Peter Aronella pointed out in a PBS analysis of the case, his fame explains why he wasn't arrested earlier, despite the blood evidence. An average suspect would have been arrested immediately, but the detectives treated him more like a celebrity than a criminal suspect. On the afternoon of June 17, the police declared Simpson a suspect in the murders and began actively pursuing him. For a few tense hours, it seemed possible that one of America's most celebrated athletes might try to evade the law entirely. Around 6 p.m., Simpson called 911 to reveal his location. He was riding in the back seat of his friend Al Cowling's white Ford Bronco, holding a gun to his head as Cowlings drove slowly down the freeway. That evening, the nation tuned in as news outlets covered the dramatic car chase. Simpson, threatening suicide, made his way toward his Brentwood home at a leisurely pace. Millions watched the surreal event unfold, leaving many to question how, months later, Simpson could plead not guilty when his actions that day seemed to suggest otherwise. Years later, in a Fox TV interview, O.J. Simpson reflected on his feelings during the aftermath of the murders, explaining that he felt as though he had lost everything he had worked for. The public admiration he once enjoyed vanished overnight, and he expressed that the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman felt like the end of his own identity. Ron and Nicole were physically gone, and it was as if they killed me too. Who I was, my essence, was also attacked and destroyed. Initially, the trial was scheduled to take place in Santa Monica, the site of the crime. However, it was eventually moved to downtown Los Angeles, reportedly to prevent any appearance of bias, as Santa Monica had a predominantly white population. The shift resulted in a jury consisting mainly of 8 black jurors. Still, William Hodgman, one of the lead prosecutors, dismissed the idea that the location change was an attempt to avoid a mostly white jury for the high-profile black defendant. In a PBS interview, Hodgman clarified that at the time, major cases throughout Los Angeles County were typically handled downtown. He emphasized that filing charges in downtown Los Angeles was a practical decision to expedite the trial. There was a general understanding that the case would be tried downtown, so we decided to move forward without delay, and proceed as efficiently as possible, Hodgman explained. Prosecutors Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden led the case, but legal experts quickly noticed that their strategy appeared unfocused. Instead of beginning with the physical evidence against Simpson, they chose to emphasize his alleged history of domestic violence toward Nicole Brown Simpson. This initial focus hinted at a broader issue: the prosecution's tendency to deviate from key points, overemphasize less relevant details, and fail to articulate their most critical arguments. These issues were compounded by Judge Lance Ito's repeated failure to keep the trial on track. Scott Turow, an author and attorney, commented on the case during a PBS discussion, noting how the prosecution's lack of focus contributed to the trial's excessive length, ultimately making it the longest criminal trial in California's history. Reflecting on the 6 months it took the prosecution to present their case, Turow remarked, "The jury was left with one of two possible impressions. Either the evidence was overwhelmingly strong, or the prosecution was dragging out the process to make their case seem more convincing than it actually was." Unfortunately, in this instance, it was the latter impression that stuck with the jury. Normally, the testimony of the first officers at a murder scene would be invaluable, but in the O.J. Simpson trial, the prosecution made a critical mistake by relying on Mark Fuhrman. Fuhrman was primarily called to testify about the evidence found at the scene, including the bloody glove he discovered on Simpson's property. Initially, his testimony for the prosecution seemed solid. However, when defense attorney F. Lee Bailey cross-examined him, everything unraveled. Bailey asked Fuhrman if he had ever used the N-word, to which Fuhrman replied that he had not. Unbeknownst to him, the defense had recordings of interviews Fuhrman had given to a screenwriter, in which he used racial slurs, endorsed police misconduct, and even suggested that a cop could commit murder without consequence. These revelations led to perjury charges against Fuhrman and lent credibility to the defense's claim that he may have planted the glove on Simpson's property. When Fuhrman was recalled to the stand and asked if he had ever planted evidence, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination for all questions. Adding to the prosecution's troubles was one of the trial's most infamous moments. In a bold but disastrous courtroom move orchestrated by prosecutor Christopher Darden, the prosecution essentially staked their case on the bloody gloves found at the crime scene in Simpson's estate. Following Fuhrman's testimony about the gloves, the prosecutors asked Simpson to try them on in front of the jury. This decision would later be remembered as one of the worst strategic blunders in legal history. Under Judge Lance Ito's instruction, Simpson stood and approached the jury, visibly struggling to put the gloves on. Dan Abrams, a court TV reporter at the time, described the moment in an interview with Law and Crime, noting how surprising it was that the prosecutors proceeded with the demonstration. "We assumed they must have tested the gloves beforehand to ensure they fit, but the frustration on Chris Darden's face said it all. Complete disaster," Abrams recalled. To call the demonstration a failure would be an understatement. The jury saw a theatrical moment that undermined Fuhrman's testimony further and gave Simpson's defense a golden opportunity for their closing argument. Johnny Cochran's now famous line encapsulated it perfectly: "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." To this day, it remains unclear whether Mark Fuhrman or any other investigators actually planted evidence against O.J. Simpson. Considering how strong the case appeared to be initially, it seems illogical for anyone to fabricate additional proof. However, the defense focused significant efforts on undermining the physical evidence. For instance, a defense expert testified that a bloody sock linked to the crime was unlikely to have been worn when it came into contact with blood. Fuhrman's decision to invoke the Fifth Amendment when asked directly about evidence tampering only fueled suspicions, further complicating the prosecution's case. Speaking with PBS, Simpson's defense attorney Sean Chapman Hawley offered a plausible theory regarding why evidence might have been planted, even if the investigators believed Simpson was guilty. "I think they genuinely thought he was guilty and wanted to strengthen their case," she said. "What they didn't anticipate was the thoroughness of the defense team in uncovering where they framed him and the mistakes they made." Surprisingly, the prosecution's missteps extended beyond the mishandling of evidence. 2 witnesses, both prepared to testify, were ultimately excluded by lead prosecutor Marcia Clark. The first, Jill Shively, claimed she nearly collided with Simpson's car as he was allegedly speeding away from the crime scene. According to Shively, Simpson was racing through the streets, ran a red light, and appeared to be in a hurry. However, Clark decided not to use her testimony after Shively sold her story to the tabloid TV show Hard Copy for $5,000, which Clark believed had ruined her credibility. The second witness, Skip Junis, reported seeing Simpson at Los Angeles International Airport discarding something into one of his bags. Despite this potentially critical testimony, Junis was also left off the witness stand. In Shively's case, Clark was reportedly furious about her decision to appear on Hard Copy and felt that her actions discredited her, leading her to abandon plans to call Shively as a witness. As for Skip Junis, Inside Edition speculated that the items Simpson discarded could have been critical evidence. Junis later told the outlet that he was baffled as to why he was never called to testify. "I said, I don't understand why you haven't reached out to me because I thought this might be relevant," he explained. While O.J. Simpson's prosecutors pursued numerous tangents and made questionable decisions, they underutilized what might have been their strongest asset, the DNA evidence. Forensic scientist Gary Sims testified that blood samples found in Simpson's Bronco matched the DNA of O.J. Simpson, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ronald Goldman. Considering that Simpson and Goldman had never met prior to the night of the murders, this evidence was highly incriminating. However, during her closing arguments, Marcia Clark only briefly touched on this crucial detail, burying it within a sea of unrelated information that likely left jurors confused. Prosecutor William Hodgman later reflected to PBS that the team may have overestimated the jury's ability to keep up with the exhaustive web of physical and circumstantial evidence presented throughout the lengthy trial. Christopher Darden's closing arguments compounded this issue, as he repeated much of the overwhelming detail from Clark's statements, without emphasizing the critical importance of the DNA findings. Today, many impartial observers believe there is a significant possibility that Simpson was guilty of the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. This widespread belief makes it difficult for some to comprehend how Simpson was acquitted. While the trial's outcome was shaped by various factors, legal experts interviewed by PBS suggested that a football metaphor might best capture the situation. Simpson's seasoned and strategic defense team came prepared, while the prosecution's inexperience and overconfidence left them unprepared to counter the defense's tactics. Simpson's dream team effectively took advantage of systemic flaws. One of Simpson's attorneys, Alan Dershowitz, offered a different perspective during his PBS interview. He argued that the case demonstrated the legal system working as intended, though this may have been unsettling for the public. "The public much prefers the old system," Dershowitz remarked, "where the prosecution doesn't have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, doesn't have to uphold the Constitution, and doesn't have to play fair with the evidence. The possibility of O.J. Simpson's innocence cannot be entirely ruled out, and it's hard to predict how anyone might react if falsely accused of a heinous crime. However, it's safe to say that most people would probably not write a book detailing how they would have committed the crime they claim they didn't commit. Yet in 2007, Simpson did exactly that by announcing the release of a book originally titled, "If I Did It, This Is How It Happened." Simpson's accompanying interview on Fox TV, recorded shortly before the book's intended release, provided a first-person account of how the murders might have occurred. While framed as a hypothetical confession, many aspects of the interview appeared far from hypothetical. The book's publication was initially blocked, but in an unexpected turn, a bankruptcy court granted its copyright to the family of Ronald Goldman. They chose to release the book under the title, "If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer," complete with a preface written by Goldman's sister, Kim. Simpson claimed that his motive for writing the book was to secure financial stability for his and Nicole's children. However, any profits from the book now go toward fulfilling the civil judgment awarded to the Goldman family.